During this lesson you will be required to fill out a worksheet. I recommend you read through the worksheet before viewing the lesson. In order to give you time to do this, you can use the pause button at the bottom of the screen. Building materials, timber, properties of general materials used in construction. Learning outcomes. By the end of this lesson you should be able to 1. Give an example of where timber is used in the construction of a building's fabric. 2. Give a brief description of one characteristic of heartwood and one characteristic of sapwood. And 3. List the benefits of using seasoned timber and state what the rot danger zone is for timber. Timber, a naturally occurring material with inherent defects, so for example knots and shakes. It is probably one of the most difficult materials to quantify for design purposes because of the vast difference in the properties between various species. We can see some examples over in the images on the right hand side there of natural defects that occur in timber. So the first one we have there in the top left is a single heart shake. So we can see there's a bit of a split there that's naturally occurred across the grain of the timber as down the trunk of the tree. And the next one beside that then is a ring and cup shakes, which we can see are kind of with the grain all around in circles there around the trunk of the tree. And down in the large image in the bottom right hand corner then we have naturally occurring knots. So this is where the tree was growing, where branches would have been grown out of the tree when it was smaller. For more information on knots and shakes and inherent defects in timber, you can have a look at Article 1, which is listed at the end of this lesson. So timber continued. Timber can be used to form the entire fabric of a building. So it can be used for constructing walls, floors, roofs, windows, doors, and even foundations. Once the timber is completely immersed under the ground so no air can get to it, then the timber won't rot. Worksheet. Question 1. Give an example of where timber is used in the construction of a building's fabric. Classification of timber. Mainly classified as either hardwood or softwood. But however, this is a purely botanical classification and has nothing to do with the actual strength of the timber. If you want to read more about the details of the botanical classification of timber in relation to hardwood and softwood, you can have a look at Article 2, which is listed at the end of the lesson. So it does not have, when we're talking about if a timber is referred to as hardwood or softwood, it does not have a direct bearing on the weight, hardness or durability of the various species of timber. For example, balsa, although the lightest timber known, is actually classified as a hardwood. I'll tell you what this classification is. We can see some examples down in the images at the bottom of the screen here. The first one on the bottom left hand side there is an image of an acorn. So this is from an oak tree. So an oak tree will be classified as a hardwood, not because the timber itself is hard, but because the acorn, the seed of the tree, has a hard shell on the outside of it. The other example then of a softwood classification can be seen over on the right hand side there. We have some pine seeds from a pine tree. Pine trees are classified as softwood, not because the timber is softer than an oak tree, but simply because the seeds from the tree have a soft shell on the outside of them. Classification of timber continued. The heartwood, which is the inner trunk, we see in the diagram down there, we can see the heartwood is highlighted with a red circle around it there. It's the very inner trunk, okay, is more naturally durable, while the sapwood, which is the outer trunk, so the newer timber that's not as old, accepts impregnation with preservatives more easily. So although timber is classified as hardwood, softwood, we can see that that's only a botanical classification, and what we'd be more interested in when we're talking about using timber for construction would be heartwood versus sapwood. Heartwood is more durable, so it's going to be a better timber to use. Sapwood, however, accepts impregnation of preservatives, whereas all heartwood wouldn't necessarily. But of course the heartwood might not need the preservatives because it's naturally durable, depending on where you're going to be using it. Properties of timber. Because of the vast range of properties that the various species offer, it is impossible to generalize. Timber has a high strength to weight ratio in both tension and compression, and is also elastic, so it's just as strong in tension as it is in compression, and it's also very elastic, so it can bend and flex. Depending on the species, timbers range as follows. Weight, so you might look at different types of timber in relation to their weight. Moisture content, which is extremely important, we'll talk about that in a little while. And then also durability, its ability, that's the ability of the timber to to fight off fungal infection of any type. Properties of timber continued. 1. The weight of wood tissue is approximately 1,500 kilograms per cubic meter for all species, but the densities of timbers vary widely. Number 2 there, the moisture content, MC, of timber has a large effect on weight, durability, workability, strength, stability and fungal attack. So the moisture content is extremely important. It's important to keep the moisture content low. Durability then, as I said already, refers to the resistance to fungal decay, and this ranges from perishable to extremely durable, and is not governed by the softwood, hardwood classification. As we already know, that's only a botanical classification. Just a note there, all sapwood, that's the wood from the outside of the trunk of the tree, is classified as either perishable or non-durable, so it would need to be treated with a preservative if you're going to use it, and definitely outside. Worksheet. Question 2. Give a brief description of one characteristic of heartwood and one characteristic of sapwood. That's one characteristic of heartwood and one characteristic of sapwood. Seasoning timber. Seasoning is the controlled drying out of freshly cut and sawn timber for a number of reasons. 1. To increase durability by taking the timber below the 20% moisture content, which is the rot danger zone. Once the moisture content of any timber goes above 20%, then it's going to be susceptible to rot and fungal attack. Number 2, another reason why we season timber, to enhance workability. It's easier to cut when dry and won't accept glue when wet. If timber is too wet, it won't accept glue. We won't be able to glue the joints together in order to construct anything. Also, the drier it is, the easier it is to cut. Seasoning timber continued. Another couple of reasons why we season timber: to render it more stable. Okay, as timber is hygroscopic, and so therefore absorbs or gives off moisture as the moisture content of its surroundings fluctuates. Number 4 then, fourth reason why we season timber is to increase its strength, as timber gains strength as it dries. So the two methods of seasoning. Number 1 there, the first one there, is air seasoning. We can see an example of it in the image on the bottom right hand side there. Air seasoning allows timber to dry out to approximately 20% moisture content, but although cheap, it is slow, taking up to 2 years for larger sections. Kiln seasoning is the artificial method used nowadays, which you can see an example of it in the bottom left hand corner there, the image. So it's the method that's used nowadays, which can achieve moisture contents of as little as 7%. So the drier the timber, the better it is to use, and the less susceptible it is to fungal attack. Methods of seasoning continued. Kilning allows drying to take place in as little as 10 days for average section sizes. We're just going to have a look at now at the range of moisture contents of of timber for different uses. So number one there, moisture content of between 7 and 15% is required for internal timbers. For any internal timbers, has to be have a moisture content as low between 7 and 15%. Number two there, moisture content of between 15 and 20% for all external structural timber and joinery. Okay, so if we're using timber for the structure of the building, has to have a moisture content of between 15 and 20%. So it's important that we keep the timber covered on site all the time to protect it from the weather. Number three there, moisture content maximum of 25% for pressure impregnation with preservatives. So basically, once the timber has a moisture content of more than 25%, it will not be able to accept pressure impregnation of preservatives. So for example, we can see in the image there on the right hand side there of the stakes which would be driven into the ground, they would have to be pressure impregnated because in order for them to last any amount of time. So we'd have to have the moisture content of that timber below 25% before they're treated. The fourth one then, moisture content of anything greater than 30% would be regarded as green timber. Green timber. And basically, when timber takes on moisture, it will swell, but once the moisture content goes over 30%, swelling stops. So the moisture content could increase, but the timber will not swell anymore. Fungi in wood. Fungi are plants which depend on organic matter for their food. They do not contain the chlorophyll which enables higher plant life to make food in sunlight from carbon dioxide in the air and water in the soil. Wood rotting fungi convert wood substance directly into food for themselves. So they eat up the timber. Sap staining fungi feed only on the cell contents of sapwood. We can see an example of some of the fungi there on timber on the right hand side. See the way it's spreading out all over. These are little hyphae, they're called, like little arms that spread out all over and embed themselves into the timber, start sucking all the life out of the timber. Fungi growth requirements. In order for fungi to grow and for fungal attack to happen on timber, there's a number of things that are needed. There's three things that are needed: moisture, food and air. In order to eradicate fungi or make sure the fungal attack doesn't happen on your timber, you only have to take away one of these three things. So moisture, only wood at a moisture content of more than 20% is susceptible to attack. Once you keep the moisture content below 20%, you will not get fungal attack. Number two there, food. Non-durable wood. Non-durable wood, for example, sapwood, is the most attractive type of wood for fungal attack. They like the sapwood. So if you can avoid using sapwood, or if you do use sapwood, make sure that it's treated with preservatives, and preferably pressure impregnated preservatives that go all the way right into the center of the wood itself. The third one then is air. Oxygen is necessary for respiration to take place. Remember, the fungi is a living organism, and so it needs oxygen to survive. So we can see an example there in the diagram in the bottom right hand corner, just an example of a stake that's driven into the ground, maybe a post that's driven into the ground. So generally the top of the stake will be too dry for to be attacked, because although it might rain on it, sun will come out, it'll dry it out, so it's going to be drier probably as much as it's going to be wet, and so generally it's going to be too dry for attack to take place. If we look at the timber that's right underneath the ground, okay, there's often too little air down there for decay to take place, okay, because it's submerged under the ground, too little oxygen. But however, if we look at just where the stake enters the ground, conditions are suitable here for attack, because the moisture in the ground is going to keep that section of the timber damp all the time, and it's going to have obviously the air there to feed on as well. Recognition and prevention. Recognition. How do we identify fungi in timber? Change of colour, softening of the wood, loss in weight, musty smell. How to prevent it? Use naturally durable timbers, timbers that are hardwood. Keep the wood dry at or below the 20% moisture content. Provide adequate ventilation, because even if the timber gets damp for whatever reason, if we have adequate ventilation in roof spaces, underneath deckings, underneath floors, then the air will blow through and help dry it out. Number 4 there, treat non-durable wood with preservatives if it cannot be kept dry. So if it can't be kept dry, in other words, if it's not going to be inside all the time, then treat it with preservatives. Eradication of fungi. Have the fungus identified first of all, locate the source of infection and prevent further entry of moisture. The timber has to be above 20% moisture content. How is the moisture getting in? Prevent that from getting in. This can stop the fungi from spreading. Remove all infected timber and burn immediately. If it's wet rot, which is much easier to deal with, just replace it with preservative treated timber. However, if it's dry rot, we need to clean the walls, sterilise the infected brickwork and concrete around it, because the fungi can enter into the wall and into the concrete. Note, sound timber and not removed from the vicinity should be treated in situ with a preservative. So any timber that seems to be sound, that needs to be treated as well with a preservative. Use preservative treated timbers for all replacement work. A little bit of information on preservatives themselves. These are toxins which can be applied to timbers which render it poisonous to either wood destroying fungi or insects. So it's a toxin that you're putting onto the timber. The fungi don't like it, insects don't like it, so they're not going to be tempted to try and eat the timber, which is their main objective. There's 3 different types: oil-based, solvent-based or water-based. If you're going to be using a preservative on timbers that are going to have plant life around them or whatever, then recommend a water-based preservative, as the oil and solvent-based could kill any of your plants or whatever that you're trying to grow around it. Application. There's a number of different ways we can apply the preservatives: brushing, dipping, steeping, hot and cold immersion or pressure impregnation. Brushing or spraying, we get minimum penetration just on the outside of the timber. Dipping it will get it into any crevices, so it's a little bit better. Steeping it is the same as dipping, but it goes in a little bit deeper, a couple of mil maybe into it, a couple of more mil into the timber. Hot and cold immersion, penetration becomes deeper again into the timber, which is better. And the best one of all, pressure impregnation, so we have full penetration of all sapwoods that are treated like this. Preservative will go all the way right through the whole lot of the wood, so it cannot be affected by fungi or insects. And some hardwoods allow pressure impregnation. Worksheet. Question number 3. List the benefits of using seasoned timber and state what the rot danger zone is for timber. Here's a link to a few articles that I mentioned, a couple of articles that I mentioned earlier on in the lesson. So if you want to take a note of them, you can go and search for them and read up a bit more about those couple of topics. Summary. In this lesson you covered properties of general materials used in construction, including timber, which can be used for the construction of the entire building fabric. Also, we looked at hardwood, softwood classification, which is a botanical classification. So if we're talking about using timber for construction for any kind of building, we don't need to be too concerned about the hardwood, softwood classification. More importantly, what we need to be interested in is hardwood, which is the inner trunk of the timber, which is more naturally durable, and the sapwood then, which is the outer trunk, not as durable but accepts impregnation with preservatives more easily. Lastly there, we looked at the seasoned timber. Seasoned timber, it's easier to cut and glue, and the rot danger zone of timber is 20% moisture content, so keep the moisture content of all our timbers below 20%.